What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah, and I invite you to grab a snack, a seat, and a tasty beverage, and let me talk at you for a minute. Today I'd like to talk at you about Deth Wizards, which is the newest offering from Snarling Badger Studios, comprised of Uncle Adam from Tabletop Minions and Vince Venturella of much internet painting excellence and fame. This game kind of stays in that same lane of it. It does have a skirmish mode for playing head-to-head, but it definitely is meant to gear itself more towards cooperative or solo play, which means I'll most likely be playing it solo. In Deth Wizards, you take on the role of an immortal and ancient necromancer who is set out to bring death, destruction, gloom, and darkness to the landscape. As such, you will be fighting against the heroes of these towns and villages. So your knights, your rangers, your priests and stuff. You get to play the villain with a big old horde of undead. Not really sure what else you could ask for. To play the game, you need a 22 by 30 space, which is about the size, or is the size of a Kill Team board from Games Workshop. That's the size that most of their games have been written in. Reign in Hell, Space Station Zero. Majestic 13 was the exception. It plays on a much larger board, and it's fine. I like a compact, small board. Requires less terrain in your collection for those of you at home who don't have just terrain stacked to the ceiling all the way around your house. You need 3 to 15 miniatures for your horde, plus a miniature for your necromancer, which they do make some pretty sweet STLs for, but you can use whatever you want. You need 10 to 15 models to represent enemy heroes, which if you play any kind of fantasy games, you've probably got laying around already. Some terrain, a set of 10 D6s, as well as a set of 10 D10s, and your tape measure. Next up, right at the beginning, is a glossary of terms. I love it when authors put this at either at the very, very beginning of the book or at the very, very end of the book, not somewhere in the middle of the book, because for those of you who don't highlight and tab up all your books, it makes it much, much easier to find. It also, at the beginning, I like that it kind of gives you a preface to some of the mechanics and things of the game. Throughout the book, there are many, many, many examples of play that are detailed and fairly well written. So that's another good thing. No diagrams to speak of, but lots and lots of examples. Book then dives straight into building your necro and all that. We're not going to go into all the detail for building that because we'll talk about that together later. But there are 6 different lineages or dark legacies of necromancer that offer different play styles. There are a lot of 20 different types of minion, each with a different rating going from 1 to 4. The rating has to do with how you build out your list and your composition. You get X number of rating that you're allowed to bring to the battlefield. And then we have all the stat lines and everything else for those baddies. And then it comes into necromantic powers, because your minions are not the only dead and deadly things on the battlefield. There are 24 different powers, and including some universal powers that don't count against your number. So pretty much everybody has those 3. So a lot of variation in ways that you can build those powers to build out different loadouts and to make the play style different, or to suit it to the way that you want to play the game. I want to have a giant horde of crappy minions that I just throw at stuff. That's what I want to do, at least to begin with. If that fails miserably, then I'll try again with something else. Now, any practitioner who is worth his weight in demon binding salt knows that you can never rise to the atmospheric and catastrophic levels of a dread lord without a proper lair to call your own. There are 3 different types of lairs in the game: a cave, which will ultimately upgrade to a dungeon; a hovel, which will eventually become a tower; and sewers, which will eventually become a Labyrinth. And there are different things, amendments, stations, facilities, it calls them impedimenta in this game, but they're upgrades that you can add to that base to give you either different effects in the game or maybe different effects in the post game. This is a pretty common aspect in Snarling Badger's games. I don't think it was a thing in Reign in Hell, but from there on, they've included this kind of mechanic. And I've seen it in many other games recently where you have a home base that does things that affect the play, and I love it. I love it because it builds that immersion even deeper and gives me an even better feel of the world and the character that I'm taking on as this demonic necromancer. Next, we're going to roll on into activation, movement, combat mechanics. So there are two different sets of activation steps. One for if you're playing in skirmish, one for if you're playing in story. If you're playing in skirmish, the main difference there is the bid to determine initiative. So everybody at the table bids an amount of necromantic energy, of which you regain 3 at the start of the turn up to whatever your maximum is. And then you bid, and whoever wins that bid gets to go and activate first, and then you go in the order descending. When it's your turn, you will activate 4 rating worth of undead and your necromancer. Your necromancer activates every time you activate minions. Your necromancer also will activate at least 2 times, but minions can never activate more than once. Now, on the other hand, the story mode activation steps, which is what we're going to be seeing mostly on camera and on the table and with my own eyes, it's slightly different because the players automatically go first, but you do have AI. So it's all the players get to do 4 rating and their necromancer first, then 2 heroes, then the necromancers, then the heroes, and back and forth like that until everything has gone. When you activate, there is not a long list of things, which is fine. Your minions can attack, move, or use a special ability as per their rule stat block. Your necromancer can attack, move, or use a necromantic power, and hero actions are determined by their AI. Movement is just up to your movement value, and you don't have to move all of it at once, but you cannot split your movement up. Climbing is basic, as it's just double. It's the normal rules that you would see for climbing. Every vertical inch is 2 inches of your movement. You got to be able to get to the top and stand there. When you jump, you can jump something that is up to half of your movement, and the target, the departure and landing zones, must be within 1 inch of each other vertically. If you can fly, you ignore terrain penalties for going over it, but if you touch down in it, you have to test. If you teleport, you're picking something up and putting it down somewhere else that's any location that that model had line of sight to, and it still counts as having moved. And when you end in your move, it's if it fits, it sits, but it's got to be able to sit there to be a legal move. For combat, it's pretty straightforward. You roll a number of d10s equal to the model's combat stat. Any of those dice that are greater than the target's defense are successful hits and will deal 1 damage. Now, with necromancers, they're powerful beings. So when they take damage, they don't actually take damage. They lose necromantic energy. But they have a few options built in and probably some other ways to get that back over the course of the game. In addition to, well, that would be a built-in way, the ones you get at the beginning of the turn. And being that they are immortal beings, if they are reduced to 0 necromantic energy, they are not removed from the board, but instead the damage is dealt to minions that are close to them, and that damage cannot be blocked or prevented in any way. Another one of those built-in ways for regaining your necromantic energy are when a minion or hero is destroyed, because those are the 2 kinds of things that can be destroyed and removed from the board. A necromancer within 3 inches can gain necromantic energy equal to the rating of that mob. If there's more than one within 3, then it's the closest one who gets to steal the energy. Necromantic powers work the same way as attacking, with the difference being that the number of d10s you roll is determined by the power that you are using, and you are rolling against their resist. They can still respond with a power of their own if they so choose. The other difference being that melee range is default 1 inch. There may be some weapons in here that have a range of more than an inch, but the default is at least an inch. Whereas range for your powers is determined by the power itself. If it's target self, then obviously you're just doing it to you. Crits are rolls of 10. They are auto successes, and those hits deal an extra 1 damage. Fumbles or critical failures are 1s, and they are automatic fails for those dice rolls. There are 3 conditions that can come around in the game, either through an attack effect or through potentially a necromantic power. They are cursed, which is you suffer a damage when you activate. Slowed, your movement stat is reduced by 2. And weakened, which is to have your offense and defense stats, not combat offense, reduced by 2. The game uses true line of sight, so if the model can see it, you can see it. However, there are terrain pieces that provide cover, or intervening pieces of terrain that provide cover between you and your target. Those will give the target +1 to their defense rolls, as long as it's a ranged attack, not a melee attack. Some models' powers have the ability to hide, in which case no line of sight can be drawn to them, and some models are ethereal, which mainly means they can move through or over whatever they want. Normally you cannot move through any model. If you're ethereal, you can move about just wherever you doggone well please. Fancy. We then roll into the story versus skirmish campaign modes. So with skirmish play, you are generating a scenario every time. There's charts for generating your terrain, your secondary objectives, your unusual occurrences, which are strange, weird things that could potentially happen in the land of death. Determine your deployment zones, and then set up your forces. A skirmish game, victory in a skirmish game is determined when any player has 0 necromantic minions in play at the end of any game turn. In a story game, you have a little bit less to do. You are just going to determine your scenario, of which there are 11. Determine your terrain, which they give you a chart for. You can use the chart, or you can just set up a board that you enjoy and like the look of. And then determine and set up your heroes. There are 7 different heroes. A ranger, a priest, a paladin, a wizard, a warrior, a rogue, and then your common peasant villager. And each of them has their own, not necessarily page, but their own stat block that has all their stats, their ratings, their actions, all of those good things, along with their AI. Compact, all in one place. Those AI heroes will also always activate in the order that I've just listed them off. If you don't have one of those, it just skips and goes to the next one. The AI works off of a dice roll. So you roll a d10 and then consult their chart to see what they do. If they cannot perform the action that you roll, they default to their number 1 action, which they can always do. Your scenario will dictate to you which heroes you need and at which rating. When you are assigned your heroes for the scenario, you need to determine their stats. And on their cards, they will have, by their stats, like offense base 3 plus X amount per rating. So if it tells you you need a rating 4 priest, then their offense would be 3 plus 4 for a total of 7, because they get +1 for each of those ratings, which can be pretty beastly. Next, we come to the story scenarios. So each scenario's got a few things listed on it. It's got the difficulty, which is roughly the size of the horde that you need to bring to be able to complete that scenario. Now, each scenario does offer an advanced version, which is a hard mode for that scenario. There are the players, number of players you can play it with, terrain, heroes, victory, cons, the rewards, the advanced mode, as I mentioned a moment ago, and the map for what the deployment and the board should look like. Next, we got to talk about one of my favorite things in the world, terrain. There are quite a few different types of terrain: ruins, shrines, swamps, forests, crags, village houses. Pretty common types of terrain. Now, what I do like here is that they brought this back to kind of where they started with Rain and Hell, where each of those types, there's a D6 roll, and there's different kinds of effects that those terrain pieces can have on the board. So it gives you a lot more variation, and it's also a very compact way of storing and listing a lot of different kinds of terrain interactions very easily, because especially in a solo game, your third player or your second player, which is the board itself, these things matter and they make the game more interesting. Now, after you play a game in your story or skirmish game, we got to do some post-game stuff to see what happens to everybody. So the first thing we're going to do is restore our minions. For each one of your minions that got destroyed during the battle, you roll a d10 on the chart. On a 1 to 3, they're unrecoverable, can't get them back. On a 4, they are degraded but serviceable. They lose a single stat of your choice by 1. I'll probably randomize which stat they lose because I like giving that agency to the universe. On a 5 to 9, the restoration, they're good to go. And on a 10, they are upgraded somehow and they increase a single stat of your choice. Now, sometimes if a minion's just had a rough go and they're just beaten and battered, sometimes it's just to retire them and just return them to the dust and the dirt from whence they came and raise a new undead. They're a liability sometimes, and you only have a certain number of undead that you can have on your roster in your lair, and then you can swap out between scenarios for what you want to take with you. So sometimes it's important to just cull the undead herd just a little bit. When you raise new undead, you are selecting whatever type of undead you're going for here, and you roll a d6. If the roll is greater than the rating of the monster, then you've successfully risen it. You gain a +1 bonus to the roll for each time you have failed that roll in prior post-game processes, or since the last time you successfully made somebody. That's a mechanic that we saw in, I think, maybe Space Station Zero and Majestic 13, that kind of cumulative bonus for trying to do something in the post game and failing. Now, there's also the option to raise a hero that you managed to kill during the scenario. Now, fallen heroes tend to be slightly more powerful than the average shambling moron of a zombie, so they're a little bit harder to get up. So you're rolling a d10 there and you're looking for a 9+. But it gets the same cumulative bonus for fails as raising a regular undead. If you get them up, they immediately become one of the 4 types of undead: feeder, rattler, shambler, or spirit. You get to choose. They retain all of their printed special abilities, but they lose their AI actions. So potentially pretty powerful stuff there. Also, pretty cool potential modeling / painting opportunity. And of course, what's any post game without some experience? So there are some things that are the same in Skirmish and Story, some things that are different. In Skirmish, you get +1 experience if you achieve your secondary. In Story, you get that extra one if all the heroes are destroyed by the end of turn 3. In Skirmish and Story, if the necromancer has at least 4 rating worth of undead left, you get +1. If the necromancer personally destroys 2 or more heroes or rating worth of enemy undead, you get +1. And if the necromancer personally destroys 4 or more heroes or rating worth of enemy undead, you get another +1. With that newly acquired shiny XP, you can bank it, save it, you can spend some of it, you can spend all of it. You can spend 3 points to gain a new necromantic power, you can spend 4 points to improve a stat, or you can spend varied cost to get a special ability, of which there are quite a few, so furthermore or more ways to customize your necromancer and the play style of your horde. There are quite a few pages of those abilities. And as we conquer the lands of the living, our lair and our influence shall increase. So for every 2 scenarios that our necromancer completes, you get to add an impedimentia to your lair. And those are things like alchemy labs, libraries, crypts, armories, those types of additions. And each one will provide you with some type of bonus. And once you have accrued a certain number of impedimentia, your lair will advance and level up. So the sewer will become the labyrinth, etc., as we mentioned earlier. Now, of course, as we're growing our lair and our influence and our horde, there are mobs of peoples with torches and pitchforks that would love nothing more than to undo our progress. That's where we get the concept of lair assaults. So at the very end of your postgame, you roll a d10, to which you're adding the number of story missions that you've had since your last assault. If that roll is 11 or higher, then you are going to fall victim to an angry mob of peasants, with probably a few nobility or knights mixed in, just for good measure. When that assault happens, you need to consult the missions you've completed and look for the one that has the highest difficulty rating. You're then going to subtract your base defense, your lair defense, from that number. So if the highest one was difficulty 8, and you have a lair defense of 5, 8 minus 5 is 3, so you would then lose 3 minions that are just gone. After in the next post game, you can try to raise some more, but for your next game, they're gone. If that number that you need to deal with is higher than the total number of undead that you have, or total rating that you have, then they wipe out the entire horde, which is pretty much game over for that necromancer. I would say that's probably, other than playing through and becoming a dark god of death, that's probably the conclusion. That's how scenarios end, or campaigns end up concluding. And then past that, the very end of the book, we have some rules, summary, kind of quick reference stuff, which, you know me, I'm always grateful when authors and publishers put that kind of information in an easy to find and reference place, because it is supposed to be a quick reference, not a flip through the book for 20 minutes to find the page reference. So final thoughts, I'm excited for this game, A, because I like Snarling Badger's games, B, because I have most of an undead army painted that has just been sitting around for forever with no real purpose to put it to, where it was the star and could shine. So really excited to get those models out on the table. And also I love the idea of getting to be the bad guy. That, or not necessarily the bad guy, but the one that would normally be the anti-hero maybe. I don't know the proper term for that. Anyways, the game, the book with the PDF is like $18. They also sell these tarot-sized cards that have all your impedimentia, your monsters, your minions, all that good stuff right here for quick and easy use during play. I'm a sucker. I will almost always buy these little kind of accoutrement and accessory pieces. Character sheets are available for free download at the website. That's going to do it for today, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, letting me talk at you for a few minutes about Death Wizards. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day.